What I want to deal with tonight is basically the issue, or the issue of how we respond to the challenge in Germany to Milah. As I'm sure many of you already heard, there was a recent court decision in Germany that outlawed circumcision for religious purposes. Now, from what I understand, it's not totally legally binding. There are some problems with it. A whole variety of issues. It's not legally binding, but it's a challenge, and we have to obviously respond to it, because it could result in a problem with Milah in Germany. But the question is, my question is not the political way of how we should respond. I'm not going to talk about the logistics of how we should respond. I don't want to talk about the political issues in terms of how to go about the mechanics. It's not my interest. My interest here is the Torah question of how we should respond to this particular case. And in that regard, it's how do we respond to a challenge from the society that is around us. When the society around us is in a certain way challenges us from their perception of a value. In a certain way the challenge is because if it wasn't for a case of Milah, we may look upon their arguments in a more agreeable way. Let me try and explain what I mean by this. The actual case in Germany is that there was a 4-year-old boy who was being circumcised pursuant to Muslim practice. This boy, something went wrong in the circumcision, and the boy was bleeding profusely and taken to the hospital. At that point in time, the doctors at the hospital laid the charge in the court that this boy was subjected to abuse because he was so hurt and so harmed, that needing hospital care. Okay, and the judge found that argument worthwhile and made the statement that a circumcision done for religious purposes is not medically called for, is a form of child abuse. Well, even though this dealt with a 4-year-old Muslim issue, it dealt with circumcision, and immediately the Jewish community had to get involved. So this is something interesting, where the Jewish community had to partner itself in a certain way, or did partner itself with the Muslim community, because both communities have an idea of circumcision for religious purposes, though we have to say lahavdil, of course. But the fact is that we have to join forces with them to fight this law. Okay. Now, the fact is, though, is that the person who promoted this, who was against this circumcision, looked at it and said, "Wait a second. This kid was 4 years old. He was a healthy kid, and all of a sudden he had this operation at the age of 4, and he started to bleed, and it was a real problem." So the argument against it is that you don't put the child in such harm. Now, the fact is, we can make a distinction that, of course, us is 8 days old, and it's not such a problem. At 4 years old is a problem. But the fact of the matter is, we can make that distinction, because the truth is that for whatever reason, it could be that halachically we also could have a situation of a 4-year-old who would need Milah, and so forth. So you can't make the distinction in that regard. The fact is that we are saying we have an obligation to do this medical practice on our children, not for medical reasons, for religious reasons, and we feel that is important to be allowed to continue doing. Now, the argument is, on a certain level, and to look at it, is those against it are looking and saying, wait a second, because you have some religious belief, you believe in something, you're going to subject your child to this quote-unquote mutilation, because that's going to be the argument. I'll get back to that in a sec. You have to look at it and say, well, they're looking at it saying, you don't have a right to do that to your kid for religious reasons. If you want to practice your religion, gesundheit, go practice. This is what the other people say. If you want to practice your religion, gesundheit, go practice your religion. But if you can't do it to your child. Okay, now if you think about this, fact is let's take the case of what they term female circumcision. I know in Canada, if a family attempts to do female circumcision, which is some operation done in the genitalia of a girl, okay, they will get into trouble in Canada, because that is perceived to be mutilation. And these people will argue religious rights. Religious rights. Our argument, what we would do is basically, there might be something that says, that's terrible, shouldn't do that to your kid. But the truth is, you have to be very careful about that, because they're arguing religious rights. And obviously we reject those religious rights, but the truth of the matter is, in the world of freedom of religion, when you're relying on freedom of religion, you have to recognize that you have to allow the right of any freedom of religion. This is why you have an interesting case that happened, I believe, in Baltimore, Maryland, where there was pagan groups who wished to reintroduce animal sacrifice. Idolatrous pagan groups, okay, who wanted to introduce animal sacrifice, argued freedom of religion. And a whole variety of Orthodox Jewish public action organizations, I think the OU, the Aguda, RCA, they all got involved to defend the right of this idolatrous sect to practice their religion. Why? It's freedom of religion. Because we argue freedom of religion to allow shechita, and people argue against us in terms of this aspect of shechita. So we have a problem that under this world we have this strange thing where we're arguing for a right of people to practice idolatry. So we're not getting into that. But why do we do it? Because it's necessary for us to protect ourselves in terms of our right of freedom of religion. So the truth is these people who are arguing against this are saying, hey, listen, you can't do that to your kid. And in a certain way, we might have those same emotions when we think about this female circumcision. Or when the courts step in and put in with a situation with one of the witnesses, one of those witnesses, and the blank witnesses, right? Even though really the halachos really would be okay to say the other name, but the fact is that those witnesses, okay, the fact is because of blood transfusions that really the mother and father don't want to give their kid blood transfusions, the courts will step in and basically take the kid as a ward of the state and say, listen, we're not going to let your religion let your kid die. We're going to go in and give a blood transfusion. Okay, and we would be very careful about that situation of saying, hey, it's a good thing, because we would want to support freedom of religion. So the fact is we're in this strange situation where we have to argue for freedom of religion, and that freedom of religion has to be allowed to do circumcision. The question is for us to understand what that argument is, and for us to understand how there's a distinction from the arguments we're going to give to others to protect our right to do this act versus what we really have to believe. That's really what I want to deal with. So what we would say is kalpei chutz, in terms of the non-Jewish world, they have an argument against circumcision. Okay? We want to challenge that argument. The point is that we also have to recognize the distinctions between the argument we're going to give to others and what we believe ourselves. For example, in the case in Baltimore again, do we really believe in freedom of religion that allows idolaters to do animal sacrifice? That's a whole other issue where the Jewish stand is on freedom of religion. I once wrote something about that. It was an introspection article I once wrote, a NISHMA introspection article I once wrote. I don't think it's online. It might be online in terms of tolerance. You can check the NISHMA website to see if the article tolerance is online. But I make a distinction in freedom of religion. But the point is we do have a certain level of freedom of religion. But basically we don't believe in a right of idolaters to practice idolatry. Okay? Basically. Okay? Okay, what we have a tolerance for is the recognition that a person may not know any better. That's a different type of tolerance. But it doesn't mean we tolerate the act. But or we have a tolerance for an idolatrous religious belief in that regard. We recognize that a person may not be held responsible because he doesn't know any better. That's something else, like a NISHMA type argument. Okay, but that's a different issue. The point is, from tolerance, from this idea of tolerance, we want to support tolerance. We obviously don't, but in America, we need to have tolerance to practice our religion. So, and this supposedly I heard B'Shem Moshe Feinstein. He says, listen, it's important that it's important to protect the Jewish right to practice Torah over other issues. That's why the Ramosha told the Agudas Yisrael that their position on pro-choice and pro-life in terms of abortion has to be in favor of pro-choice. That a woman should have the right to choose what she does in concert with her religious authorities. Why? So the truth is, in pro-life, we know that the Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is the Perish Gemara and Sanhedrin. For Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, that abortion is usher for non-Jews. So the truth is, our position theoretically should be that abortion is usher pro-life, especially even though we're dealing with non-Jews. But Ramosha says that because there are forces within the pro-life camp that will prohibit, if they come in charge, that will prohibit a Torah Jew from practicing Torah Judaism because there are certain situations where abortion is mandated al pi halacha. The mother's health mother's life is in any way challenged, even if she is in labor already. The clear the halacha is that you abort, you kill the uber, you kill the fetus to save the mother's life. There are people in the pro-life camp, especially when you get at the stage of labor, very long in the justice of the fetus, that says no, that's 2 lives. We will not allow that. So the truth is, Ramosha says, because the pro-life forces have positions that are contrary to Torah, we cannot accept a position that will be contrary to Torah. Therefore, we will tell people. We will tell we will promote pro-choice to allow the choice, even though pro-choice will mean that non-Jews will violate the halacha. So the same thing over here with these idolaters. Even though idolatry is also b'nai Noach as well, we have to protect our right to practice Torah and freedom of religion. But the point is we have to really know that what our argument really is. And the difference between the argument that we're going to present to them in argument of freedom of religion and so forth versus the argument that we have to know ourselves. So here we are. The first thing obviously is we're strange bedfellows say. Well, here we argue with the Muslims. Okay, on a certain level, Islam has a positive view within the Torah. Jews generally have a more positive view of Islam in the sense that it is monotheistic. It's complicated how we look at the other monotheistic religions, but Islam is monotheistic, although it has some things that we disagree with in their beliefs. But and we obviously hold that is incorrect. Those views are incorrect. But the point is here we are in line with them and want to join with them to promote that the right for circumcision. So what do we say to these people? So one thing we say, well, what can we say to them is, hey, we should be able to have, because of religion, our right to circumcise our child. So they argue back, listen, we're going to practice freedom of religion, but not against the value of child abuse. And this is a classic issue, where freedom of religion challenges other rights. Right, freedom of religion is a right in our societies, and it challenges other rights. So the fact is what do you do in those situations when you challenge other rights? And that's a challenge that I know in Canada is constantly going back and forth in terms of these disagreement, these conflicts of rights. Okay, and freedom of religion doesn't always come up. That's why there's issues with women's rights and other things like that you have to understand. Now with gay rights versus freedom of religion, there's a constant challenge between rights, this and the rights under these rights. So the point is, it's just saying we have freedom of religion. Here the argument is yes, but that does not give. But there's another right, and that is the protection of children. And societies need to protect children, even from their children, even from their parents. We don't say a parent can do anything they want to a child. A parent cannot beat their child or whatever. So the point is that how do you do in this situation? So what argument do you give to say no, this is okay? So one of the arguments that we present is really the argument that circumcision is medically okay. An interesting argument. So we say that no, the problem you have is you think it's abuse, but the truth is it may be a disagreement among doctors, but there is clearly a strong medical opinion that circumcision has medical benefits. So we argue to the world, hey, you shouldn't challenge our right to practice circumcision, especially us. We only do it 8 days when it's not really a medically dangerous situation, because it has medical benefits. But the fact is that if we start believing that argument, we have another problem. Problem is that is not a reason we do it. The fact is, if you look at the Rambam, the reason we circumcise, according to the Rambam, is specifically because we believe that we are thereby harming the child. The Rambam says that the reason the bris, circumcision, Milah, is the sign of the covenant is because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't tell you to do it, then you would never do it. It's a very powerful statement. It's because the rational mind, the sane person, would never do it, except if they know God told you to do it. That's why we do it. So the truth is we're doing it, and the fact is that we're doing it. Now, there is a certain belief in the Kodesh Baruch Hu that obviously there must be a positive reason for doing it, but that might be ruchnius, that might be other things. But the fact is, if we do it, if we think it's medically sound, then we're going to do it anyways. That's why you see so much in our Jewish world today. And I'm not getting into the fact that this may have assisted the Jewish world maintaining Milah over the last 50, 60 years, 100 years, and so forth and so forth. But the argument is the reason we do it, because it's medically called for. We have to recognize that's not a reason we do. We have to do it because the Kodesh Baruch Hu told us to do it. And even if it wasn't medically called for, we'd be called upon to do it. Even if it's harmful. The Rambam says specifically that. Not only that, the Rambam actually says that, one of the arguments against female circumcision, lahavdil, is that it affects the potential sexual pleasure of the child. The whole concept of female circumcision is to try and limit the female's interest in this idea in sexuality. In other words, the whole idea of female circumcision as this religious act is to try and make sex painful to this girl when she becomes a woman, so she's not interested in it, and therefore she won't do something wrong. Okay. So we look at it as crazy, whatever it is, it's unfortunate, we feel bad for the girl, and so forth and so forth, it's really wrong. But the fact is, the Rambam says the same thing, lahavdil. He says the reason for Milah, and the reason it's done on the Aver, specifically on the male organ, is because it weakens the male organ. Because something that is harmed is never as good as it was never harmed. If you break your arm and it becomes repaired, it's still not as strong as it was before it was broken. So Rambam holds that one of the reasons for circumcision is to lessen the sexual drive, to lessen the sexual pleasure of the organ. Okay, it's a ruchnius argument, obviously, but the fact is that we have ideas in our thought that says that it's not medically called for. The point is that now it may be medically called for, you may feel good about it, and the truth is that we may sit there and say, you see, Kodesh Baruch Hu always knew to do it, and so forth and so forth, but that cannot be the reason we do it. We have to recognize that. We have to recognize that. But on the other hand, we also recognize another problem with this. We do have to be medically sensitive. This is the whole issue of mitzitza b'peh. In the States, there was cases of herpes affecting a child, and this became an issue in mitzitza b'peh, that the mitzitza, the sucking of the blood, should be done with the mouth. Okay, what happens in Milah is that you cut, then you do what's called you pull back. There's this thin membrane on the corona that you pull back, and then where the cut occurred, you have to draw out the blood. So what you do is you suck out the blood. to draw it out, and that's for health reasons. Gemara says that's for health reasons. But the fact is they found that there's a lot of evidence in the States that it was done Metzitza B'Peh, and the moil who did it had herpes, and this herpes virus is very dangerous for a child. So some deaths of children that were linked back to the moil having herpes. So there's this warning in New York State, for example, that if you're going to do Milah, you should not do Metzitza B'Peh. Now, the truth is that there is some medical arguments that it's not true. Herpes by the moil did not cause death, whatever it is. But most doctors say this is medically uncalled for. So what do you do? So the fact is one of the answers then is you don't do Metzitza B'Peh. Okay, because the fact is there's a whole halachic issue of whether what has to be done has to be suction. So maybe if you could have suction not through the mouth but in another way, like an aspirator or something like that, that might be enough. There were shittas that held that way. It's been an issue in the 1800s where shittas held like that. Other people use a glass tube, and they say that is Metzitza B'Peh. The suction is still with the peh, still with the mouth. The only thing is the glass tube is there, but it's still affected Metzitza B'Peh. But because there's a glass tube, the mouth is not directly touching the wound, and therefore you don't have to worry about the herpes. And that's the way a lot of doctors do it, and that seems to be a whole argument to do Metzitza that way, which would still be Metzitza B'Peh. But even if not Metzitza B'Peh, you still have the argument it's still suction, and the real halachic, the real obligation is to suck the blood in order to make the blood flow. But the truth is especially in the more right-wing Hasidic world, they really hold that Metzitza B'Peh has to be that you actually suck out the blood with your peh. The reason for that is much more a Kabbalistic argument that the reason we have circumcision is because originally Adam Rishon was born mohel, was born circumcised. Then after they ate of the Eitz Chadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of fruit of knowledge, good and evil, there was the orla grew. Okay, and that's why there was a necessity not to have a Milah. So the truth is, this argument in Kabbalah is a Metzitza B'Peh is a tikkun, is a rectification of the chet of Adam and Chava, because how did they do the chet of eating? Through the mouth. Therefore, we now rectify. The argument is Metzitza B'Peh is a rectification of the chet of Adam and Chava through the peh, through the mouth. Okay, it's a Kabbalistic argument. That's why some Hasidic groups are very adamant about doing it this way. The problem is it's a medically problematic procedure now. It's a health problem nowadays, and there's a lot of pressure in the States that the government should start outlawing this Metzitza B'Peh. And although that gets into constitutional issues, I'm not going to deal with it, and so forth and so forth. But the fact is even though I happen to be someone who believes that very strongly that once you can do Metzitza B'Peh with a glass tube, you should do it that way. And since if you have this machlokas in halacha, they say that you should do it this way. Obviously, because there's an issue of health reasons, you should be semech on the shittas that hold you can do Metzitza B'Peh with a glass tube, which is the way it seems most people hold. But the fact is that the Hasidic world really holds that to be B'Peh, really on the wound. So the fact is, even though I think that they should rely upon the opinions that hold not to do it that way, the fact is that in terms of the governmental rights, I have to argue for their right to do their religious practice, which is their understanding of a Torah practice, in the way they wish to. Okay? Because the fact is that I have to argue, even though it's a health problem, okay, that freedom of religion has to override a health problem, because otherwise you're going to have the same argument as you have with that has to be argued, but that's going to be the same argument over there, that I can't just have it that if it happens to be medically called for to do this, we'll do it. I can't go around to Germany and start saying in Germany, listen, it's really medically called for to do it. That's the argument I may want to give them, and so forth. So, but the point is I have to recognize that even was medically called for, I have to do it anyways. So I have to be careful about this argument, okay? Because sometimes the argument is really not the Torah argument itself. It's only an argument kalpei chutz. It's not an argument kalpei pnim. We have to know the truth, and then we have to know and we have to defend the right to promote our Torah anyway. And we have to know that even if we have arguments with people, like the Mitzvah B'Peh, even though Kalpei P'tim within ourselves, we'll argue with these people and say, use a tube. It's a health problem. You should rely upon the positions that say you can do it this way. We're not going to argue that Kalpei Chutz in terms of the outside world, because we want to promote freedom of religion. Now the truth is this may seem like a strange source. This actually came up in the 1700s in another case. There was a province in Germany that wanted to prohibit burials for 3 days. And obviously the Jewish community in this province were very upset, because there's a mitzvah to bury as quickly as possible. So they didn't want to wait 3 days. So they sent around a letter to major poskim and Jews of influence, whoever, to try and intercede on their behalf. And what most people don't recognize is one of the people that was sent the letter was Moshe Mendelssohn. Now when I say the term Moshe Mendelssohn, you immediately think the founder of Reform Judaism and this and that. The truth of the matter, Moshe Mendelssohn was not only he was a Gaon. He was a posek of the generation. He was a major player in the world. I mean, his beer was read by Gedolim, and he was called by Rabbi Benjamin said before he married, he said, really I would call you a Gaon, but you're not married yet. I mean, the fact is Moshe Mendelssohn was a big Talmid Chacham, and he was a posek. So one of the people they wrote a letter to was Moshe Mendelssohn. Also, he was extremely influential. Okay, because he was the philosopher of Germany. The story about Moshe Mendelssohn is that he won an award. There was a whole big contest in philosophy. He came in first. There was this other guy called Manny Kant who came in second. Okay, so I mean, so the Germans had tremendous respect. That might have been a problem because Germany was so welcoming to him. I think personally it was one of his problems. He thought the Germans would be so welcoming to Jews practicing religion. But the fact is, as he says, I could be with the king, but if I say I have to go daven mincha, they let me go daven mincha. You see, they're tolerant and so forth and so forth. Because he was also a modest individual. He didn't recognize that the king is not going to tell one of the major philosophers of the age in Germany at the time, no, you can't daven. But if a Stam Yid does it, he's not going to be so tolerant. So I mean, but I want to get into that. I mean, there's other issues there. But anyways, so they sent this request to Moshe Mendelssohn of what to do. So Moshe Mendelssohn wrote 2 letters. He wrote one letter to the government and one letter to the Jewish population. To the government, he wrote about how important it is within Judaism to bury within the day. No indication of any indication that it was okay to wait 3 days according to Judaism. According to Torah, you have to bury immediately, and therefore the Jews should be allowed to bury immediately. That's what he wrote at Kalpei Chutz. You defend the religious practice. You promote the religious practice. Kalpei P'tim, to the Jewish community himself, he wrote, and he had halachic arguments to say you should know that this idea of waiting 3 days is not so bad. And he argued, first of all, they had a reason to wait 3 days because they were never sure if a person was really dead. It was a whole issue back in those days, so that's why they had this law of waiting 3 days to make sure the person was dead. And he actually saw rigor mortis, fall, be there, and he could actually say for sure he was dead. So that was a real issue in those days. So he said really it was alright. And he also had some halachic arguments that saying waiting for 3 days is okay, and that even and that he had other arguments about burial, not necessarily in the ground right away and stuff like that. Anyways, the point is he had arguments like that. Now the truth is that he wrote to the Jewish community. This is within ourselves. How you respond, stuff like that. We have talks, but we have to know Kalpei Chutz, the argument. So that's an interesting argument over here. One of our arguments is going to be for medical reasons. Going back to Germany. Right, there's a medical reason to do it because that will support be able to practice. We have to know the limitation of that argument because what happens if it's not medically called for? What happens if there's a practice that like the Tzitz B'Peh situations? We have to promote the Jewish thing, and we have to be very clear about that, and so forth and so on. But Kalpei P'tim, we can have the argument. on one hand, we have to know that our real reason is not medical. On the other hand, we have the argument within ourselves to say, listen, there really may be health situations with that, so therefore rely upon the positions that hold its mutter. So, but that's really I think a very significant issue that we should know about. The fact is in our societies we have to know what we think and what others think. We have to recognize that why we do mitzvahs for ourselves, why we do it, we have to know our arguments for others, and we have to know the limitations of arguments for others and how it affects us. So with freedom of religion we have an interesting situation. We're arguing a value, which is a complicated value, right? But we argue this value because it is beneficial to our observance of Torah. We have to know what the arguments that will carry the day to the outside world. And we have to understand it. We have to recognize that they may not necessarily be our arguments, so that the arguments we're presenting them cannot be a reason we do the mitzvah. We have to know the real reasons. Then we also have to recognize that even the arguments that we present to them, we have to know the weaknesses of those arguments and be able to go beyond them when necessary to promote freedom of religion. And we have to be very aware of what arguments we have within ourselves that stay within our borders, and what arguments we can and be careful that these arguments don't go outside of the borders. So, and that's really been an issue in Mitzvah B'Peh, that whenever I'm going to argue with someone who does it, I have to be Kalpei Chutz, I have to promote Mitzvah B'Peh, okay, because that's their halachic position, okay, and so forth. And I also have to be aware of the fact that even as I argue for medical reasons to promote the argument in Germany, and it's not this and it's not that and it's good and so forth, I have to recognize that the reason I do Milah is not because it's good. I have to know that the Shitas even hold that it may be in a rational, secular, medical way problematic. However, I'm a mamin, and Kosh Baruch Hu said to do this, and obviously there's ruchnius benefits, and the fact is, and ruchnius shlemus, and so forth, we'll argue shlemus, which is completion and perfection, and that's why I do it, because Kosh Baruch Hu is mitzvah. And I have to understand that I have to have almost like two worlds, and that's why, in the same way, this thing with Germany has bothered me is that people are giving arguments, anti-Semitism and so forth and so forth. It's another thing we have to be aware of, that if we start, anytime anyone steps on Jewish practice, we start yelling anti-Semitism, we have to be aware about the fact that we may be missing the point. In this case over here, you recognize that once they start seeing male circumcision as comparable to female circumcision, if they turn to see female circumcision, then we begin to understand these things, and people do perceive it that way. So the fact is obviously we want to argue that it isn't, and it's different, and there's other arguments, and so forth. By the way, even according to Rambam, but the idea, all it does is lessen the sexual. The argument is supposed to lessen sexual things. It's obviously not intended to make it not functional. The whole thing with the female circumcision, especially extreme female circumcision, is actually to make the sex painful. That totally destroys the sexual drive. So the point is that it's not what the Rambam Chas v'Shalom would mean. But the point is that there's a very complicated thing in these situations, and you have to know it. The one thing I'm trying to say, though, to conclude, is that we be careful about arguments of anti-Semitism, because sometimes you're using that to try and miss the point, and the person's looking and saying, "What are you talking about? It's not. I'm against this act," and by throwing in anti-Semitism, you're missing the point. Maybe you're giving that argument because you think by throwing in anti-Semitism, you'll keep it in line. Maybe if it works, maybe you have to do that argument, even though you know that you don't really mean it. The problem is when Jews really mean it. In other words, if I'm going to argue in Germany that it's anti-Semitism, and in Germany they're very sensitive, and he said, I'm going to give that argument in order to maintain Milah. But the point is, do I really believe that the people promoting this position are anti-Semites? No. But I'm not going to tell them that. I'm going to keep that. I'm not going to tell them that, because anything I can do to promote my practice of Torah is significant. as obviously indicated by the fact that now you see me wearing a tie, this is an addendum to my shir that I felt I should add when I thought about the shir, because I mentioned Moshe Mendelssohn, and I thought I should just add a few points about Moshe Mendelssohn, because he is a controversial person within our history. As I said in the shir, there's a tremendous misunderstanding of Moshe Mendelssohn. He was the father of Reform Judaism and so forth. He was actually not just a frum person. He was a big Talmid Chacham. He was big, and in his own personal life, he was clearly frum. That's not an issue whatsoever. The fact is that I heard a Talmud of the Rav, Yeshua Soloveitchik, say that there's no doubt that Moshe Mendelssohn, in his own personal life, was medactic and halacha. In fact, the way the person said it is the Rav said that there's no doubt that Moshe Mendelssohn was even more medactic and halacha than even the Besh, than even Baal Shem Tov. There's no doubt about that. However, for some reason, the Masorah has accepted the Besht and has not accepted Moshe Mendelssohn, which is an important idea, and that's one of the things I want to state. Moshe Mendelssohn at his time was tremendously respected by other Gedolim of the time. I mean, even the Chasam Sofer refers to him as Ramoshe Midraso. So the point is that I approach this very gingerly in talking about this individual, because obviously he is a person that was a big Talmid Chacham and deserves Kavod Torah. But on the other hand, I just want to point out that in the case I referred to, where Moshe Mendelssohn wrote one letter to the secular authorities and one letter to the Jewish community, clearly arguing for the basic halachic argument to the non-Jews: you have to fight for the observance of Torah. But then he presented his argument of why, to Kopei P'tim, of why it was really not such a big problem with what the seculars were asking for. I mean, really, part of the issue is whether the ideas come from within or without. That's a big issue. It's a big issue. A lot of times, especially later when he got into issues with the reform, it was not necessarily because the reform. This is years later, obviously, because Moshe had nothing to do with the reform, because he predated the reform. But later on, a lot of people point out that it wasn't what the reform actually were advocating per se. Like, for example, speaking in the vernacular. Okay, giving sermons in vernacular. Orthodox rabbis over the world do sermons in vernacular, in English nowadays. But in that day, it was because where the pressure came from. Did it come from within, from a Torah pressure, or did it came from outside? People trying to do something else, and that's part of the issue, in the sense they had to fight it because its motivation was wrong. Not necessarily even if the action itself was not such a problem. The question is where the motivation came from. So the point is that there's a little inkling of that in this case over here. Because the point is, Moshe Mendelssohn saying that the government's asking for this issue, you should know it's not such a big issue, and so forth and so forth. But the fact is in the time of Moshe Mendelssohn wrote that, he actually was in correspondence with the Rav Yaakov Emden. And his position vis-a-vis the burial actually created a rift between him and Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden's position, which is the same position Moshe Mendelssohn took, Kal Bechutz, in terms of the government, was that we had to fight the government decree. He, though, also took issue with Moshe Mendelssohn's argument that it was really not such a big issue. And he absolutely disagreed with it. Now, there might be two reasons for that. One thing is Rabbi Yaakov Emden would really have disagreed with it. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was a very strong person who held certain positions. He obviously had that disagreement with Rav Yonah Eibschitz and so on. So it might have been that Rabbi Yaakov Emden disagreed with the argument of Moshe Mendelssohn in halacha, which doesn't necessarily mean that Moshe Mendelssohn's argument was outside halacha. But it might also be that Rabbi Yaakov Emden was really upset that you even informed the people it's not such a big deal. Because the fact is, and this is something you see from the Gemara many times, that in terms of halachic arguments, unless the masses really know the details of the halacha, if you give them a halachic argument for why something that is mutter in a specific situation, since they don't know the ins and outs and the details and so forth, they will think that generally it's not that significant. So the point is Yaakov Benjamin might have taken issue with Moshe Mendel saying, listen, you want to talk to me and tell me you have a halachic argument that really we can wait 3 days, it's fine. But to go to the masses and say something which they consider to be very important and tell them that it's okay, it's not so important, maybe he took issue with Moshe Mendelssohn arguing that. But the point is the reason I'm just trying to say this is that even though I did try to say that in the shir that Moshe Mendelssohn, looking at his in terms of his other side and what he did, and it was interesting how he copied plus and copied him, that there were people who were even there were people like Yaakov Benjamin who were upset that even he presented this argument copied him, that was okay to do this, and that might be an argument of whether you present every argument to the masses, even if you know halachic arguments and so forth, because the masses may understand the intricacies. Might be the Yaakov Benjamin also just disagree with the whole argument. But the other side to this issue is the fact that it's still important, like the Rav said, the Moshe Mendelssohn was accepted by the Masara. So the truth is that my own position is I always refer to Moshe Mendelssohn with respect, because it seems that he wasn't on Adam Chashuv as an individual. Whatever the weaknesses were with him, whatever the reason that his shame became associated with Reform Judaism and so forth and so forth. It's unfortunate the shame has been associated with them, but the fact is he himself as an individual seemed to have been a real kosher yid. But the point is it's still important that I should obviously clarify that it seems that like the Rav said, he wasn't accepted in the Syrah, and it's important also to recognize that therefore we always have to approach whatever he says with whatever he says and so forth with a little bit of caution. So I wanted to point that out because I didn't say it in the original share that it's been bothering me that I should at least put in that caveat.